joining us today. We have some pretty cool things to share with you today. I know we had about 250 or so registered folks for this webinar, so we figured it was a good topic to share. We want to make sure that we fill this up with the most relevant information for everybody. And as we go through the webinar, feel free, put your questions in the Q&A. We'll answer them live. If not, for some reason, we'll get back with you after the webinar. But we'll go ahead and get started. Just really quick, some introductions. I'm Jamie Williams. I'm with Heiden Technology. We also have with us JP Rowe with MSP Overwatch. And then we also have Jason Rory with MSP Overwatch. Just real quick, MSP Overwatch, they are a third-party cybersecurity company that works directly with managed service providers, IT providers, to make sure that their internal security controls are on point. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that is all about and why it's so important. So with that, let's jump in. I want to kind of start with the title of this webinar, the IT Provider Crucible. So with that, JP, can you fill us in on what exactly, why we did that?
Yeah, for sure. So as far as my role within MSP Overwatch, I'm on the product development side and basically making sure that what we're creating serves a purpose, you know, more from the user experience side and what it's actually providing than from the technical, pure technical side. And what we are doing as a company is trying to fill this huge hole nationwide in cybersecurity where IT providers themselves are giving hackers access to their clients. You know, it's a big. You've seen it in the news a lot lately. You know, the IT provider, or what they're often called the managed service provider, is compromised, and then through that provider, the cyber criminals are able to conduct attacks on all of their clients or a portion of their clients. And so the only way to really address that, well, in the market, there really wasn't a way to address that necessarily because the IT space is so unregulated. So that's what MSP Overwatch actually came in to do, is try to solve that problem by, like you said, testing and verifying and making sure that there's a set of standards that an IT company can be held against to make sure that their risk of this happening is very low. Now, the IT Provider Crucible, if you know that word, it's a test. It's a very hard test. And what we wanted to do is try to come up with sort of like a front-end battery of questions that any end user, any enterprise or organization, a hospital, a law firm, or whatever, could ask their IT provider to give them some real insight as to whether some of the more important measures are being taken to prevent that from happening. Obviously, these questions are things that are addressed in the MSP Overwatch certification program that Jason created, but they're very important things that it's just good to know. You need to really know that your IT provider is doing these things. Now, we partnered with Heiden Technology, obviously, for this webinar because they were one of the first IT companies in the country that stepped up to actually say, hey, we think we can meet these standards. And officially, they were the first company in the country that did. So they're very forward thinking on their cybersecurity. It's really a great thing for their clients to know that when you look at the world of independent third-party testing among IT providers, based on everything we know, Heiden can probably make cybersecurity claims that no other company can make right now, simply because nobody's really out there testing themselves. Not a lot of people are getting certifications because there aren't any. So the Crucible is meant for anybody, whether you're a Heiden client or just an office manager, or you're looking to secure your business, to take these questions to whoever's doing your IT right now. Ask them. It gives you some ground for demanding an answer, because that's one thing that we wanted to make sure when we were putting this battery of questions together, is that we can't leave room for the IT company to skirt around it and say, oh, you know, that's not really as important as they're saying it is. It is. If we put it in here, it is important. So that's pretty much it. Does that explain kind of the foundation of what the Crucible is there for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Well, with that, JP, thanks for that. Let's get started here. All right. If I can learn how to use PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. All right, so we talked about what the IT Crucible is, and the first question we have is employee screening. Now, it's not just employee screening like you may think. So kind of with this one, Jason, if you want to jump in, you know, having a few successful companies that you work with and kind of creating the MSP Overwatch for IT providers. With all the certifications you have, Jason's wrote a few books on cybersecurity. He has a laundry list of certs and things that he's done in this industry. So as far as employee screening, Jason, can you dig a little bit deeper into what does that mean, and what should a small, medium-sized business be asking their IT provider with respect to employee screening?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important, and a lot of MSPs or IT service providers, they don't do it, and it's key that they should, because they're bringing people in to work for them and ultimately giving those people the keys to the kingdom, to all the clients to obviously do their job. So what you want to make sure is that you're bringing the right people in, and then you make sure that you're not going to potentially bring someone in that could turn into an insider threat. So you're doing, criminal background checks, credit checks are another huge one. Typically people that may have financial difficulties may be more likely to become that insider threat, because once they have access to such sensitive information that could easily be, say, sold on the dark web, you just want to make sure that you're not bringing any of those people into your organization.
Now, Jason, wasn't there an event that happened, maybe even this year, that I heard about, where there was an IT provider that had an employee that tried to sell their clients information on the dark web? Was that this year?
I believe it was. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. Yeah, I think it was disgruntled guy, and again, he had all the keys to the kingdom, passwords, records, you name it, he had access to it. He stole a copy of it. I mean, it's easy to do. Just download it to a USB drive and on his way out, and then it went up for sale, on the dark web.
Wow, that's scary.
And that's also why one of the things in the MSP Overwatch certification is a documented process on exiting an employee.
Yes, it is. To make sure that those accounts are disabled or passwords reset, appropriately, upon termination. And there's also controls in there to prevent, the theft of the data to begin with. So it's crucial to really protect the data, even from your own employees, if that makes sense.
Right. Now, what would be an ideal question? And then what would be some examples of evidence that an IT provider could provide me? Let's say that if I was a small business, a law firm, and I say to my IT company, hey, can you provide me evidence of some employee screening? What kinds of things would I be looking for?
A relationship that the IT company has with maybe an HR company or a staffing company that can, properly conduct the background checks, and they should even be able to show you maybe a sanitized copy of the background search. Maybe blacking out the sensitive information like name, address, social security number, depending on the check. But just to show proof that they really are screening people and they're hiring the right talent that, again, won't ultimately turn into a potential insider.
Okay, great. All right. So question number one, employee screening. Make sure you ask for it. Make sure you get some evidence. Just don't take their word when you ask and they say, oh, yeah, we do that for sure. Make sure you get some type of evidence that they are. Your data is at risk. Your credentials are at risk. And it's just not worth it. All right. So second question, awareness training. Now, when we say awareness training, we're not just talking about awareness training for you as the SMB, as the client to the MSP. We're talking about awareness training that the MSP or the IT provider is actually doing internally. So with that, Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do and actually what it's the same thing that Heiden Technology does for your business?
Yeah, it's essential that, even as an IT company, you test your staff, even the technical people, because a lot of times technical guys may be a little bit overconfident at times, and maybe even to a fault that makes them more vulnerable to a phishing email. Because some of these emails are getting more and more legitimate looking, more believable. So it is easy and as busy as, some IT companies can be. And that's kind of what the bad actors hope for is you're busy, it looks legitimate, you click on it, and then an attack can be launched. I mean, and I think the statistics, 91% of all breaches, start with a phishing email. So if you think about what kind of information are on the systems that are inside of an IT service provider, and if they were to click the wrong link or open the wrong attachment and those machines got compromised, then essentially their tool set can become compromised. And when the tool set becomes compromised, the clients that they support can become compromised as well. And I think that's kind of what we've seen in the IT services industry lately with some of the companies that got breached. It started with a phishing email. So I mean, it's critical, even if you're a technology company, to make sure that you're testing your staff.
Right. Now, a question that SMB could ask an IT provider to show evidence. What would that evidence look like, Jason? Would it be reports of their phishing attempts, or what would that evidence look like?
I think a couple things that would be good evidence is, do they have a training policy in place that talks about the types of training? Do they do email phishing simulations? Do they do online video training? Maybe a combination of the two. How often do they do it? Because if you're only running training once a year, it's nowhere near enough. Within my companies, we do it on a monthly basis. So you want to kind of see maybe if they have a formal, kind of training program or policy in place. But then also, like you mentioned, the reports would be good to see that they're actually doing the training and following through, on the program. And any awareness training vendor that is out there, usually has some really good reportings on, phishing simulations, who opened it, who clicked on it, or if it's more of a video series, who attended it, did they pass maybe the short exam at the end to make sure that they were paying attention. So those would be really good things to ask for.
Yeah, I know at Heiden Technology, we've been doing monthly awareness training, and that's really important in our organization too. So we've been a big, I've had to go through that many a times. So,
yeah.
All right. Okay. So that's question number 2, awareness training. Make sure you ask for it. Make sure you get those reports, the results of that awareness training for the actual IT company. Now, on the other note, if you do have an IT company, an MSP or IT provider out there, and you're not doing awareness training in your own organization, it might be a good idea to ask them if that's something that you can add on to your services.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right. Next question. Data centers. So where is your data stored? There's so many times as a salesperson, you get the question, is my data safe, more safe with an Amazon, Microsoft? Is it more safe in a local data center with my MSP? What are the differences? What are the questions I need to be asking? I think a lot of times even MSPs have a hard time answering that. I've seen in the past. But actually having questions as an SMB to ask your IT provider, if your data is stored in the cloud, what does that really mean? And Jason, what do you think some good questions would be for an SMB to ask in regards to their data and where it is?
I think that would be the first question. Where is it? I mean, when you think about cloud, it could be literally anywhere in the world. And a lot of compliance regulations kind of mandate that if you use cloud services, that the data is actually stored in the United States. So that would be, the first question is where is the data physically stored? And because, like you mentioned, with Microsoft or Amazon, it could literally be anywhere in the world. So you just want to make sure that it's kind of more contained in the US. And so that is an advantage to using an IT service provider that, has maybe their own data center infrastructure that you could leverage for cloud computing, because who has access to it. There's more granular control over it versus some of the big box cloud providers, as they say. And I think the second one would be is your data center, has it been audited for physical security? So typically a SOC 2 certification is a question to ask for. The data center, the facility itself should be able to generate that report or that audit letter just to ensure that the proper controls are in place at a physical facility level to ensure that the systems that actually store the data are protected appropriately.
Okay. Any physical, is there any physical type questions you can ask, like who has access to the data center? Are there generators? What kind of physical security is in place? Who can get into the building where the servers are? Things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are all great questions. Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to know who can physically get in. How is it controlled? Is there security guards? What type of methods do they use to authenticate you as a human being? Do they use biometrics, or they just use badge access? Which can be very vulnerable. So you want to make sure that there's multiple kind of checkpoints within the data center that people have to authenticate their way through to get to the systems. And another great question is the redundancy, because obviously if you doing cloud computing, you're doing it for the benefits that come along with it. So you want to make sure that the data center has all the proper redundancy on the physical infrastructure, meaning power, connectivity, so there's not any outages or very few.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. So again, just to reiterate, make sure you find out where your data is stored. If you have any type of regulations, Jason, just to go a little bit deeper on that, like regulations, when you say that, do you mean like HIPAA? Do you mean PCI? What kind of NIST or what kind of regulations would cause someone to definitely ask where the data is?
I mean, most of the industry controlled regulations like HIPAA or GLBA for the financial sector, and now with the DoD contracts transitioning into CMMC, that's a big one where the data definitely has to be stored in the United States. Even Microsoft had to come up with their own US-based isolated infrastructure just to host data for DoD contractors to be in line with the CMMC compliance. So it just depends on the industry and what compliance may govern the security of the information that you work with, or again, whether it's healthcare, financial, government. So if you're in any of those industries, these are great questions to ask.
Right. Okay. All right. So next question here, super important, backup and recovery. And we found over the years that's not just cut and dry anymore. It's not just, okay, is my data backed up? Can my data be restored? There's actually a little bit, you got to go a little bit deeper nowadays into that. And it, like the slide says here, it's more than just, do I have backup or do I not? So there's some questions that we want to talk about, Jason, that go a little bit deeper into what about RP and RT? Can you talk a little bit about what those mean and why that would be important for an SMB to ask their IT provider?
Yeah, absolutely. So RPO is recovery point objective, and then the RT is recovery time objective. And they're different in a way that recovery time objective is the acceptable window of time where systems can get back online in the event of an outage before it becomes detrimental to the business. So it's just getting systems online and starting the recovery process. Now, recovery point objective is how much data could be lost in the event of an outage before it becomes detrimental. So, for example, it may be acceptable for maybe a 4-hour window to get the systems online, but when they come online, the data can only be 1 hour old, because you have to think about it. The bigger the RPO window is, the more information may have to be rekeyed, even if that's possible, depending on the type of business. So the big question is for small businesses really to ask themselves the question of how long can my IT systems be offline before it becomes detrimental to the business, and how much time of productivity of my employees can I lose before it is detrimental. And if that is 2 to 4 hours, great. And then you go to your IT service provider and then ask them the question, can our systems be back online in this 4-hour time window without losing more than 1 hour of productivity? And that's the question I ask them to ensure that the way that they have your backups configured would meet that objective. And if not, then some changes need to be made.
Right.
But a lot of IT companies out there, they still just kind of traditionally default to backing up once a day. So if you as a small business are okay with losing up to 24 hours worth of productivity and being offline for 24 hours, then a nightly backup would be okay. But I'm pretty much certain that no small business would say yes to that. So you really got to, think about your business as a small business owner, and then start asking those questions to your IT company to ensure that they have the proper solution in place that could meet those objectives.
Now, what would be some evidence that an IT provider could show an SMB to prove that they are meeting those objectives that they've come to an agreement about?
The biggest proof is to test it. To have the IT company actually show you the recovered systems, maybe even in a test environment. If you didn't really want to take your production systems offline, any decent backup solution, you should be able to do a recovery in kind of a test mode or a sandbox, and be able to show you, here is the failover system, or here is the offsite system for disaster recovery. And look, you can log in, you can see all your data. I mean, that's the ultimate proof, is to test them. I mean, kind of do a fire drill, if you will. Just tell them, say, hey, let's go through it. I want to see my data be restored in the offsite location, and get access to it, look around, make sure it's there, what needs to be there. That's the ultimate proof.
All right, great. All right, anything else you want to add on backup and recovery?
Just to test it. I mean, it's crucial. They say, backup's only as good as the restore capability. So it's something that needs to be set up right. You need to be able to hit those objectives time-wise, and have it regularly tested to ensure that it works properly.
And Jason, you gave an example yesterday that was really good of recovery point objective, just in case anybody's kind of like foggy on what that actually translates to. It's the example you gave was a medical office or a hospital.
Yes.
Over the course of 4 hours, how much data is actually being input into your system? That's super, super important. If your recovery,
I think we I think you paused, JP. Well, Jason, if
point is 4 hours in the past, even though you get everything back online, it doesn't matter how quickly you get. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you keep going in and out.
Oh, maybe Jason can finish it.
Yeah. So the example is, how much medical information, as an example, is entered into patient charts in a 4 to 6 hour period. If you think about losing that time of all that information that was inputted into these electronic charts, would you even be able to remember what you lost? Because most medical practices are all electronic these days, so they're not duplicating work by writing it down at the same time they're putting it into electronic charts. So if all the nurses, for example, had to rekey all that in, if they could remember it, it would just be very detrimental. If they could even remember it to begin with. And if you think about the type of information in the charts, if they're prescribing medication and you lose that information, it has a lot of consequences. So you just want to make sure that you're thinking about those time objectives and you're able to meet them.
Right. All right. Okay, next question, third-party inspections. Now with this, we mean almost like a third-party audit, which is kind of where MSP Overwatch, or not kind of, but absolutely where MSP Overwatch came into play with Heiden technology. So it's all great and gravy if we as Heiden technology say, oh, you know what, we meet all the wonderful cybersecurity controls, and all our clients are safe and sound with us, which we hear from a lot of our competitors out there say that. But what we wanted to do is take it a step further. And we wanted to say, we're not only saying that we can prove to you that we're doing these things internally, which then in turn is protecting you, our client. But we're also going to get a third-party auditor. We're going to get a third-party cross-check assessment to come in, and we're going to pay for that. We're going to invest in that, and they're going to triple check to make sure that all the controls that are that pertain to an MSP are being met, and we are proving that. So with that being said, Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about how important that is for an MSP to get that third-party cross-check?
Yeah, and then it's important to the MSP to check, their systems, because a lot of times, they're very focused on the clients, and rightfully so. So maybe in some cases they don't focus so much on themselves. So it's similar to what IT service providers do for their clients. They're checking their systems, making sure that all the security posture is in line with the best practices. But sometimes they're not doing it to themselves, and that's why it's very important to have a third party come out and check the security of the IT services provider, because if they're not doing that, then how truly secure is the clients that they support? Because again, the IT service providers have access to all the systems across all their clients, and if they're not protecting those systems and those tool sets appropriately, then they're ultimately leaving their clients vulnerable. So getting an assessment, having tests ran quarterly, annually to ensure that the controls put in place to protect the IT services company, remain working. And that's really critical to do as well.
And we've seen it in the news, again, to bring this this up, but we've seen it all the time at these MSPs, these managed service providers that are getting sued over and over again from their clients because they said we do cybersecurity. And aren't we seeing JP and Jason, aren't we seeing that word just being overused by managed service providers right now? What is cybersecurity? It means something different to this MSP, to this MSP, to this SMB. And I think a lot of times SMBs are just kind of trusting the fact that when an IT provider says, oh, we do cybersecurity, that just means, okay, we're protected. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
Well, that's where third-party inspections as a general rule of common sense are so important, right? Like if you check into a hospital, you expect whoever is going to work on you to be some kind of a credentialed healthcare professional. Like you don't feel like you should have to ask and find out and do a background check on the guy who comes into the room to see if you're okay. Like there's systems in place to make sure that the right people are doing the right jobs in the healthcare industry. And cybersecurity is not caught up to that yet. The IT industry hasn't caught up to that yet. And unfortunately, anybody, anywhere can say I'm a cybersecurity expert, and there's nothing stopping them from saying that. Now, that's not to say that a lot of IT companies are doing that, but that's just telling you how unrestricted it actually is. Now, the other issue that you run into is that it is not a clearly defined service level by any standard. I mean, somebody could say complete cybersecurity and it means this, and then another company could say complete cybersecurity and it means something hugely different. And then it's really hard to put the burden of the end user, the enterprise user, to put that on them to figure out, is it really complete or is it not really complete? Because it shouldn't be expected for an office administrator to have to learn everything there is to learn about cybersecurity to make sure that their IT provider is honestly providing it. So that's really where MSP Overwatch emerged, is this need for a body of experts to serve as an intermediary and say, hey, we checked for you, we know what we're talking about, and they passed. Because currently there's just nothing out there like that. So now, yeah, I mean, Heiden Technologies has that huge advantage in the ability to say that a rigorous test that was developed by a board of cybersecurity experts was created and you passed it. And that's one of the few ways out there right now that you could actually substantiate any claims you make about being a secure cybersecurity provider.
Yeah, and I'll tell you guys, it wasn't easy. I mean, the team at Heiden really had to go through a lot of work. There was a lot of time invested in putting all the evidence together, uploading it to the portal, making sure all the policies were in place. But at the end of the day, I will say that it's really given our engineers a lot more confidence, just because everything has a policy. And, you know, the ability to sit down and show our clients about a 300-page, what we call run book, which has all the evidence that we supplied MSP Overwatch in order for us to get the badge and get the certification. So I just want to let everyone know this wasn't something that was done overnight. This took months for us to be able to do, but you know, it was that important. And the reason we want to have this webinar today is because there's a lot of questions we think that, you know, SMBs need to be asking their IT providers. Even if their IT providers don't necessarily have an MSP Overwatch badge, just these 5 questions are so important to really ask, and not just ask, but also get the evidence. Make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing and they can prove it to you.
Yeah. And to clarify, I mean, the MSP Overwatch process and getting our certification is not anywhere nearly as easy. Like you said, it's actually more like 57 questions that are very hard to answer, and you have to provide physical evidence. This is not something you earn on the honor system. We check the work very. Jason manually checks everything himself to make sure that it all passes muster and that you're actually earning this certification. Because at the end of the day, if we were just handing them out willy-nilly, it would be worthless. It has to actually be backed up with some real evidence.
And I know Jason has about 4 or 5 other board of directors that went through all of our data also.
Yep. Yep. And they also help create the some of the questions and things like that, some of the controls that have to be passed. I mean, this is definitely rigorous, and that's really what it comes back to is, again, a third-party inspection is super important. It's one of the things that an IT provider should be doing. They should be getting an outside view of their own security and also what they're offering their clients, but it has to be legitimate. It has to be a legitimate outside objective look too. You know, there's in the MSP space, there are a couple of badges that somebody can go get by just saying, you know, here's some money. Let's fill out a 5-question, 10-question questionnaire with no evidence, and then they'll give you a badge that says, "Hey, I'm a great cybersecurity provider," and that doesn't really help anybody. I mean, it doesn't inform the IT company if they're actually missing something. They'll never know. It's not going to tell them, and then it's giving kind of a whole false sense of confidence. So,
right. All right, so third-party inspections. Make sure that your IT provider is getting them. Now, on the other hand, let's talk real quick about, let's say that we have some folks on the webinar today that have an internal IT department. This still pertains to you guys. Still having an outside company coming in, and Heiden Technology actually can provide that service to SMBs. And we can provide that cross-check, and we can go through and actually have a tangible portal for you to upload evidence on. We can kind of go through the same process that we went through as an IT company. We can do that for you, and we will work with your IT department to kind of just help you sleep better at night. Make sure your IT department is doing what they say they're doing, and they are able to provide evidence that that is the case.
Yeah, definitely a good point. Like, you know, Jason would tell you we don't work with end users, but Heiden can. Heiden can actually, by earning their certification, they've earned the ability to also evaluate others and internal IT departments, their clients, anybody that they need to, and it still gets run up the chain to be finalized. But yeah, there's definitely the opportunity out there to take that extra step yourself and make sure that you're completely secure. It's always a good idea.
So our clients, regarding this service, if our clients or anybody out there wanted to learn more about this, you know, they could always contact us. Now, it wouldn't be Heiden just kind of doing the cross-check. It would also be MSP Overwatch. So you're kind of getting double cross-checking going on there, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So again, we talked about the badge, the certification that Heiden Technology has, one of the first companies in the country to actually be able to provide this level of security and be able to prove it. So a couple things we just wanted to talk about is, you know, the reason that this Crucible was so important for us to make is just educating SMBs on what to ask and what to really look for. But we just wanted to give you some stats here. So 11.7 million is the average cost of cyber attacks to global firms per year, and that's just growing. This cybercrime is not going away. It's not getting any better. We're not fighting it any better. So like Jason will tell you, there's nothing that's foolproof. There's nothing 100% that you can do that's going to make you just bulletproof, right, Jason?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, nothing is bulletproof. Nothing is hack proof. You just have to put the controls in place to lower the risk as much as possible, but with the understanding that you will never eliminate risk. So, I mean, if there's anybody out there that talks about a hack proof this or bulletproof that, there's just no way to do it. So you just want to make sure that you're protecting yourself properly and lowering that risk to an acceptable level.
Right. So I guess another big number, 60% of SMBs that took 30 plus days to recover from a hack. Most businesses would go out, they would just be out of business after something like that. So we're trying to help with that. So again, if you want more information about that, you can always contact us. We can do a cross check for you, help you sleep better at night. But with that, we want to just give you a few more little tips and tricks here. So just a recap of what we went through. Number one, we want to make sure we do that employee screening and to make sure you get proof that your IT provider is doing that internally. And you can get that evidence by asking them for some redacted employee credit checks, background checks, things like that. Also, ongoing awareness training, making sure that the IT provider is actually doing awareness training internally. So looking at reports, things like that. Data centers, find out where your data is being stored. If you're regulated, make sure it's here in the U.S. Also ask about physical security in that data center, how they're protecting it, who can access it. Backup and recovery. Find out what's acceptable, those objectives. Find out what time is the acceptable time that you can be down and how much data can be lost that you would have to rekey in. And then third-party inspection. So figure out, hey, let's hire a third-party company to come in and make sure that we have the processes and policies in place. Now, four more things we wanted to talk just quickly about is dark web scanning. I'm sure everybody has heard about the dark web, how all of our credit cards and all this scary stuff is all on the dark web. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about how important dark web monitoring is?
Yeah, it's very important. I know it's somewhat new, I'll say over the last couple of years, but with just the human nature side of it and people using the same password for every website that they register for, and their company email, I think it's like 76% of people use the same password. And if that password does end up maybe getting breached on a third-party website and get sold on the dark web, then in theory, those bad actors could take the associated username, email address, and password that they bought on the dark web and log into maybe something a little bit more sensitive like a banking account, because their hope is the password's the same or it's a very similar version of it. So having a solution in place that can alert you if your email address or username, password shows up on the dark web, so you can kind of take proactive action and get those accounts either removed or reset is pretty essential these days.
Yeah, Jason, I saw a post that went up yesterday that said you had to change your password on, at work, and so now you have to rename your dog.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. But
yeah.
Very true.
All right, the next thing we have, a lot of people probably don't know what this is. It is getting a little technical. We want to bring it up. Is 24/7. It's actually log monitoring. So actually monitoring the logs of the important systems. So servers, domain controllers, firewalls. There's other devices. Obviously, you can monitor raw logs. That would be called a SIM, and then a SOC would be a security operations center, which is usually a 24/7 place that you have security analysts looking at any kind of, I guess, red flags that come up from those logs. It's a really technical type, I guess, solution, but it's so important. And Jason, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to watch the logs because you don't know what you don't know that's going on your network. And most everything from brute force attempts to try to crack passwords, to maybe some piece of malware getting, onto a system and trying to maybe do elevated credentials to try to gain access to an administrator account. Some of these things you normally wouldn't see without monitoring the log data. So, any type of password attempts or authentication attempts will show up in the logs. So it's really important to watch those logs 24/7, 365, and then having that security operating center looking through that log data and then alerting on anything that they find. So like the dark web, so you can take the proactive action to stop it before it turns into something a lot more serious.
And a lot of the companies that are regulated have to, pretty much based on some of the controls, have to have a SIM and SOC in place, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, because auditing is a huge piece, and of course that ties back into log data as well. Just kind of the who, what, when, and where. If something were to happen, you would need to find that in the log data. So it's a huge part of pretty much every compliance.
And in an ideal world, really, like everybody would be monitored, because that is really the only way to catch some of the bad actor. It's like a bank has security cameras, even though they have a huge vault door and an armed guard. They still have cameras. Why? Because people always figure out a way to get around whatever static defense you put there. And that's exactly what hackers are very good at doing, is they can get around things. But if you're looking at the environment, you can see those attempts to get around things and react to them and do something about them. And so it would be great if everybody was on some sort of program where they had 24/7 monitoring. It's getting a lot less expensive, but a lot of small businesses, it's a little bit cost prohibitive. But I would say, definitely if the opportunity came up, if your provider offers it and you can afford it and you really want to feel secure, that would be one of the things you should opt for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And AI-driven endpoint monitoring. So again, this is getting a little technical, so I'll let Jason kind of ride with this one.
Yeah, so it's the newer age endpoint monitoring. Like JP said, the hackers and bad actors are getting really good at hiding things in malware, in email attachments. So having something that is more behavior based and can learn the system and what's normal and what's abnormal, and then be able to actually take action on it, and not just alert, but I'll do something about it. And that's getting more and more critical to have on IT systems nowadays versus the traditional just signature based, where if it it either matches a rule or it doesn't, and then it can take action from there. But that's where a lot of what they call 0-day attacks happen, is the hackers can find a bug and actually infect systems before a new signature can be released by whatever software company controls the antivirus. So, but if you have an AI-driven endpoint, there's a good chance that it would see that 0-day attempt, know that it's abnormal because it doesn't match the behavioral pattern of the system, and then it can stop it.
It's funny because last weekend I got a text message on my phone, and it said, did you make these last 3 purchases? And the first purchase was like a $500 purchase at Lowe's in Phoenix, and I'm in Detroit. And so obviously it wasn't mine, and I replied no. And then someone from the bank called me. So is that kind of an example, Jason, of the AI monitoring?
Yeah, it is. So again, they just learn behaviors, learn what's typical and not typical. It does take some time and some tweaking, if you will, to kind of get those behaviors just right. But if you get it right, it can be a great security tool, because it can do stuff just in an instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I had to, they had to cancel my card, and I had to get a whole new card. But hey,
Could be worse.
Yeah, it could be worse. It could have drained my whole bank account. And then finally here we have documented policies. And, I really think this is important, because this is kind of the proof in the pudding. I know a lot of time at Heiden Technology, a lot of time with our techs went into putting those policies together, which in turn was that was the piece of it that kind of glued it all together for our engineers and helped them have that confidence. Like I said, because if something happens, they know, okay, we go get this policy, follow it to a T. So that's kind of what gave us the confidence that once we were able to put those policies together and everybody knows where they are, everybody knows how to access them, when to access them. Jason, you want to talk a little bit about how important documented policies are, not just for the IT provider, but for the SMB too?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, just like all the rest of the stuff. I mean, it's crucial to have those policies, because without them, there's really no understanding of the expectation, and so it really needs to start with the ownership partners in the business to have a policy that kind of dictates the expectation of how the data is secured, and then there will be kind of sub policies underneath that talk more specific around certain things and how that security should be handled. And then you kind of go into the control phase and make sure that the technology that you're implementing is satisfying the policies. And then, there's regular testing to ensure that it continues to work. But yeah, I mean, the policies are super important for any business, because like you mentioned, it just builds that confidence. People know exactly what they need to do in any given scenario. And I mean, a quick example is an incident response policy. So what are the steps that if you were to get hit and infected with ransomware, what are the steps that you take? If you don't have a policy in place and people understand what that policy says to do, without it, it's just chaos. And the ransomware could have a bigger effect without a policy than it could if you knew, okay, we see it, we contained it, we responded to it. So yeah, it's really, really important to have these policies in place.
All right. Well, guys, we're coming up to the end here. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. We will definitely make this a recording and make it available, but you can contact us at heidentech.com or reach us at 877-886-1584, or you can email carl@heidentech.com. Again, I want to thank Jason for joining us with mspoverwatch.com, and also JP. Thanks, guys, for joining us and for your input today. Thank you so much. And everyone, please, make sure you ask these questions and get that evidence from your IT providers. And we look forward to you to join us for our next webinar. And the next, we'll probably be doing one in another 8 weeks or so.